All right, hey everybody, picking up from part 6 of Intro to Communism. This will be continuing to read my lecture on Lenin and the Bolshevik dictatorship, discussing the iron fist of the proletariat and whether it will in fact wither away as Engels and Marx were arguing. The working class and gradual overthrow is the first section, the dictatorship of the proletariat, the second section, the PRMC and the Cheka as the third section, the Cheka and the Red Terror, and then the conclusion. That's where we're going. The second thing to note concerning Lenin's explication of Engels' withering away of the state is that Lenin did not expect that the working class would be able to overthrow the rule of the bourgeois in a gradual and piecemeal fashion. The opportunists were arguing that the workers, in being empowered to elect its own representatives, were more and more in place to be able to overthrow the bourgeois government in a gradual way. Lenin argued, in line with his view of Engels' withering away, revolution alone can abolish the bourgeois state. The opportunists thought that Engels' withering away was pertaining to the gradual overthrow of the state through the increased strength of the working class. In time, they argued, they would be in a strong enough position to overthrow the bourgeois state. Lenin, reading Engels differently, knew the state was a special coercive force designed to keep the working class in subjection. So notice, Lenin knew the state apparatus was necessary for keeping the class in subjection. There would never be a chance for the working class to gradually gain strength against the state. Only a proletarian special coercive force could do that. Instead of gradual overthrow of the bourgeois state by the working class, Lenin argued that the only mechanism that could abolish the bourgeois state was the dictatorship of the proletariat. The dictatorship of the proletariat would be the special coercive force that replaced the bourgeois special coercive force that suppressed the bourgeois instead. This view of the withering away of the state further clarifies Lenin's position over against the opportunists and distances the working class from a significant role in abolishing the bourgeois state. Now, the dictatorship of the proletariat. The third thing to understand is that the withering away of the state for Lenin is really thought of as the withering away of the dictatorship of the proletariat. So first and foremost, we need to recognize Lenin knew that the bourgeois state would not wither away. It had to be crushed. And it would only be crushed by a replacement of a different proletarian state. Well, that proletarian state, according to Engels, would then wither away, but we'll see that it won't wither away. However, what it turns into is it turns into what's called the dictatorship of the proletariat, and this becomes a special coercive force that oppresses and crushes not only the bourgeois, but also the proletariat, which is what you saw earlier in other videos of the different purges and terror. But what is this dictatorship of the proletariat, and why is it needed? As briefly mentioned, the dictatorship of the proletariat, this is the special coercive force needed to suppress and take the place of the bourgeois state. The dictatorship of the proletariat would be the special body that suppresses the bourgeois in the form of abolishing the state. Then, after the bourgeois state is abolished, the special coercive force would begin to wither away. Furthermore, Lenin argues that Marx and Engels are saying the proletarian revolution needs to be organized as a political ruling class in order to overthrow the bourgeois state and establish its economic system. Check out my Reading the Communist Manifesto video. Lenin says, quote, "The proletarian needs state power, a centralized organization of force and organization of violence, both to crush the resistance of the exploiters and to lead the enormous mass of population. The peasants, the bourgeois, the petty bourgeois, and the semi-proletarians in order to organize in work of organizing a socialist economy. The goal here is to replace a state with another state. The goal here is not to replace a state with another state, but to replace the state with a socialist economy. However, there will need to be an intermediary state for transitioning from the bourgeois state to the socialist economy. This means the proletariat must have a united ruling class capable of crushing the resistance and leading the people. That's the true communist in the Communist Manifesto. This ruling class, transitory state, is the dictatorship of the proletariat. After all antagonisms go away, the dictatorship of the proletariat will wither away, or so he says. For Lenin, this is the true definition of a Marxist. Only he is a Marxist who extends the recognition of the class struggle to the recognition of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The dictatorship of the proletariat is a necessary apparatus that transitions from the bourgeois state capitalism to communism. The dictatorship of the proletariat is that proletarian state which will eventually wither away, or so he claims. This, combined with the role of the working class and the abolition of the bourgeois state, is what Lenin means by the withering away of the state. In summary, these clarifications of what Lenin means by the withering away of the state provide the necessary context for understanding the progression of the Bolshevik Revolution. What Lenin means by the withering away of the state begins to reveal his approach to the government in Marxist theory and Leninist practice. Now, on to the PRMC and the Cheka. Given the above background on Lenin's view of Engels, the withering away of the state and the dictatorship of the proletariat, we must now explore what this looked like in reality when the Bolsheviks took power in the October Revolution of 1917. Here we see the Marxist theory put into practice. The Petrograd Revolutionary Military Committee, the PRMC, Petrograd Revolutionary Military Committee, was the special apparatus that was formed to enable the Bolsheviks to take power. The PRMC is referred to as the iron fist of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Nicholas Worth in the Black Book of Communism states that Felix Dzerzhinsky, who from the earliest days had played a decisive role in the PRMC, characterized it as a light, flexible structure that could swing into action at a moment's notice without any bureaucratic interference. There were no restrictions when the time came for the iron fist of the proletariat to smite its foe. Here, the PRMC is being described by its own leader as the iron fist that accomplishes what the dictatorship of the proletariat needs done. The things that needed done were such things as the following: forbidding counter-revolutionary tracts, closing all 7 of the capital's principal papers, bourgeois and moderate socialists, taking control of the radio and telegraph stations, and setting up a project for the requisitioning of apartments and privately owned cars. The PRMC existed for 53 days. During that time, high-ranking officials acting against anything the Bolsheviks were doing were deemed as enemies of the people, and their names were publicized as such. Judges and courts were immediately set up in direct contradiction to the earlier bourgeois courts and bourgeois justice systems. It seems that the PRMC and Dzerzhinsky both were told to take care of and took care of by initiative any and all societal and political problems that arose during the early time prior to and shortly after the coup d'etat of the Bolsheviks. And I'm saying coup d'etat because of Richard Pipes in his book argues this is just a coup d'etat. This is not predetermined or directed by any sort of historical evolutionary forces. Taking care of things eventually or perhaps immediately meant using a bullet in the head or other kinds of revolutionary justice methods. By the time the PRMC was disbanded for a newer and better organization, the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission to Combat the Counter-Revolution, Speculation, and Sabotage, the Cheka, that is the long name for the Cheka. The PRMC was disbanded, and now it made room for the bigger and better Cheka, which essentially becomes the KGB over time. Wirth states that it had facilitated the seizure of power and defended the new regime until it had time to create its own apparatus. Thus, the Iron Fist ceased to operate, but only was replaced by a larger Iron Fist. The Cheka was essentially the Bolshevik counterpart to the Tsarist secret police called the Okhrana, was immediately established under the Soviet Council of People's Commissar, the SNK. The Cheka reported to the SNK, but it was still led by Dzerzhinsky with full approval from Lenin. He and the Cheka were to deal with all questions of security of the revolution. Within 6 months of its creation, in December 1917, the Cheka had increased in personnel size from 100 to 12,000. By the middle of 1918, it was needing to address and confront 110 peasant uprisings. So the people... those uprisings, and had grown to about 400,000 personnel. By 1921, it was a force of 280,000 people and had taken full responsibility for the struggle against the counter-revolution throughout the Republic and its role as a supreme enforcer of the administrative power in Soviet Russia. In general, anything that opposed the revolution, including the West, or anything Western, was deemed counter-revolutionary, from alcoholism to monarchist to press affairs. Once the death penalty was reinstated, which they were already doing it, the Cheka had most means of implementation within their grasp, though they simply had acted outside the law prior to this. With Dzerzhinsky as the leader, the bullet in the head method was a proven method. The PRMC and the Cheka were the iron fists of the proletariat, dictatorship of the proletariat. These organizations were crucial to seizing and keeping Bolshevik dictatorship. These were the Leninist practicing arms of Bolshevik government. Even if the PRMC went away, another stronger Cheka took its place. These were not withering away. The Cheka and the Red Terror. As the Bolsheviks were facing food shortages and general unrest and revolts from the areas under its control in the late summer of 1918, the Cheka began to use another method of taking hostages, killing them, or putting them in concentration camps. This was another measure to break down the counter-revolutionary forces and heads that led them. There were nearly 140 major revolts and insurrections that had broken out, and there needed to be more effective ways to deal with them. Additionally, in September 5th, 1918, the government authorized Red Terror. See my other lectures on Red Terror. Roughly in response to 2 assassination attempts, one of which was on Lenin. This began a wave of killings that amounted to about 10,000 people during the autumn of 1918. Wirth argues the Red Terror marked the definitive beginning of the Bolshevik practice of treating any form of real or potential opposition as an act of civil war. These numbers only rose with the imprisonment of more than 70,000 by September 1921. Though there were other armed bodies involved than just the Cheka, railway militias, food detachments, frontier guards, and the Red Army, the Cheka and Dzerzhinsky were the primary movers of the terror. Overall, the Red Terror and the work of the Cheka, and really any other arm of the Bolsheviks, began a systematic crushing of the people of Russia that lasted for quite a long time, and with historic consequences. Wirth states again, in the space of just a few weeks, the Cheka alone had executed 2 to 3 times the total number of people condemned to death by the Tsarist regime over 92 years. So yes, this was another secret police, just like under the Tsarists, but they killed vastly more people. Thus, the comparison of the Cheka to the Okhrana breaks down, as the Cheka far exceeded the perceived brutality of the Tsar's regime. The iron fist of the proletariat, dictatorship of the proletariat, had been effective. In Lenin's words, a good communist is also a good Chekist. Here, it seems we have indicated that the iron fist of the dictatorship of the proletariat is not to wither away, but will become an integral part of what it means to be communist. Though transitory at first, the Cheka seems to now have a permanent character in the Bolshevik regime. This is a very different flavor of what we were led to believe concerning the withering away of the apparatus of the dictatorship of the proletariat or the proletariat state. Here we see that the iron fist of the dictatorship of the proletariat has not withered away, but it is very much alive at this point in the Bolshevik Revolution and dictatorship. Lenin's original clarification points of the withering away of the state are beginning to take shape and in practice. The iron fist of the dictatorship of the proletariat is very much needed and a crucial coercive force to not only suppress the bourgeois, but also to manage, suppress the state resources like food among the peasants. What this amounts to is a suppression of the proletariat as well. If the proletarian state is to wither away, it is doing a few more things than originally planned. The Leninist iron fist is crushing more things than just the bourgeois. Conclusion. In conclusion, the thing to note here is that the iron fist of the dictatorship of the proletariat, the Cheka, the PRMC, and the Cheka did not wither away. The dictatorship of the proletariat up to this point in Russian history has not only not withered away, but has grown stronger and more ruthless. I would venture to say that the dictatorship of the proletariat never withers away until the actual fall of the Soviet Union. Perhaps even today it has not gone away entirely. The main thing under examination was the withering away of the state and what that amounted to. So far, the proletarian state has not withered away and has shown no signs of doing so in the near future. Now, once again, this just referred and was wrestling with the Marxist terminology of the withering away of the state and what it means. And what we've discovered is that it never did wither away. And in fact, the dictatorship of the proletariat exists through the entire USSR and just moved from under the Bolshevik dictatorship to the PRMC, becoming then, through a series of changes, to the KGB, which, quote, ended in 1991. All right, thank you all. Have a great day.